I've got a pen to take executive actions where Congress won't, and I've got a telephone to rally folks around the country on this mission.
We have a system of government outlined in our Constitution with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Congress has its job to do, and so does the president. And when there's conflicts like this between the legislative branch and the administrative branch, it's, in my view, our responsibility to stand up for this institution in which we serve.
There is a solid legal rationale for each of these steps that the president has taken.
Speaker of the House John Boehner saying today the House will sue President Obama for exceeding his executive authority. It's important to point out on executive orders the breakdown here of presidents, the number of executive orders specifically signed, and you see it in President Clinton, 364, George W. Bush, 291, and President Obama so far, 182, the total number of executive orders signed. We're back with the panel. Charles, Democrats point to those numbers and say, you know, look at the numbers.
It's a completely irrelevant statistic. What matters is the breadth and the scope of each of these executive orders. Obama has essentially rewritten the laws on immigration, on drugs, and then he rewrites his own Affordable Care Act after it passes. You cannot do this. I mean, that's the Constitution says the laws are passed by Congress have to be carried out by the executive. Everybody knows what Obama did with the employer mandate, with individually canceled plans, with deadlines that he decrees just on his own are going to be postponed. It's called implementation latitude. That's not what's going on here. He's essentially having a blank slate. He's writing his laws. On immigration, the Congress was asked in 2006 whether it wanted to do the DREAM Act, which is to say that people brought here as children will not be deported. The Congress said no. Obama essentially enacted it by ordering the ICE, the Immigration Service, not to deport young people. That's a contradiction of how the system works. And with the drug laws, the administration has ordered prosecutors not to prosecute certain drug laws. Well, that's fine. If we agree on that, we should have a debate in Congress and we pass it. The policy issue, it could be a good one, but you cannot do it unilaterally, which is why it's a good thing what the House is doing. There might be a way, and it has a novel theory here on how it can get standing in the courts. The reason it hasn't gotten redress is because the courts have said Congress has no standing. This perhaps is a way to get it.
Kirsten, in addition to Charles' argument, Republicans point to regulations. The EPA, for example, final rules since January 20th, 2009, when President Obama took over, 2,839. And the health care law, 23 unilateral changes by the Obama administration, changing, Congress says, and Speaker Boehner says, the essence of the law that was passed by Congress.
Well, I'm not a big fan of executive power, but Republicans are. So I think it's going to be interesting if this is successful, which I really hope it is, and I'm being completely serious, because things like NSA surveillance or Libya intervention, for example, which both be abuses of executive power, those are the kinds of things that perhaps the court might find illegal. And I think that would be a good thing, and this will, unfortunately, for Republicans, be applied to Republican presidents in the future as well. So I think that will be interesting to watch.
Steve?
Well, part of the problem with the way that this president, President Obama, has sort of hoarded executive power is that it's totally inconsistent. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, you can argue, you can disagree with what George W. Bush and Dick Cheney did, but they made a principled argument in favor of executive power, applied it, and carried it out. Barack Obama railed against executive power as a member of Congress, railed against it as a candidate, came to Washington, and he's sometimes decided that he likes executive power. Usually in the domestic arena, he's decided he likes executive power. But on foreign policy and national security, where the Constitution actually grants him a fair amount of leeway, he's decided basically he doesn't. And we saw this most in evidence in the Syria debate, where he wanted to be constrained. So for the first time, he decides Congress is relevant and takes it to Congress.
Charles, to Kirsten's point about signing statements, for example, President Bush had signing statements. Vice President Cheney spoke very often about executive power.
Well, here's the counter-argument. In foreign affairs and the conduct of war, there's been a constant tug-of-war between the executive and the Congress for 250 years. because it's ambiguous. It's hard to see where Congress's power stops, the executive starts. And this is a struggle. For instance, the War Powers Act has been on the books 40 years. There's not one president who's ever accepted it as real law. Some have adhered to it nonetheless. So in that area, there is an argument, and you often get executives reaching, or you might say overreaching. But on domestic law, there is no ambiguity. You pass a law, you can't amend it after it passed. And that's why I think the usurpations of this administration are so obviously egregious, and why the frustration of Republicans, and I would say principled liberals like Jonathan Turley, who talks about an Uber presidency, are so important. You have to put a stop to that, or the Congress becomes totally irrelevant.
You didn't know this, but you teed up a soundbite for me. Jonathan Turley.
That's why I get the big bucks.
Yeah.
We have a system that's designed for 3 branches, but we now have a 4th branch in the form of federal agencies. Those agencies are now exercising judicial, executive, and legislative power. They're becoming a government unto themselves. I happen to agree with many things these agencies do, but as a constitutional scholar, it worries me. It is a dangerous thing to have the emergence of a 4th branch in a system built for 3. And most of that power is being taken from Congress.
Last word, Kirsten.
100%. But Jonathan Turley also, if you ask him about what Charles said in foreign policy, would completely disagree with everything that he said, and would say that the president does not have the latitude that he thinks that he has in these situations.
Is this a political issue that is going to come up in midterms or 2016?
It's absolutely. Republicans and conservatives around the country are incredibly fired up about this, and I think part of what John Boehner is trying to do here is respond to that sort of sense of anger and say, we're doing something, we're trying to do something about it.
One quick correction, the GDP fell to a negative 2.9%, almost 30 times the initial estimate. Just wanted to point that out. That's it for the panel, but up next, financial hardship seems to be quite the rage these days.